All right, hello, welcome to our second episode. My name's Justin Yannick. This is Maria Lloyd, and this is Catalyst for Healing. So, if you want to learn a little bit more about us, maybe go back to the episode before this. Today, we're going to talk about one of the more common questions that we both get working in the psychedelic space, and that is, what does it feel like?
Yep.
Right? Would you say that's probably one of the most
That's
common questions you get when you talk about
probably
this?
the biggest question because,
Yeah.
people are always a little afraid, like what's going to happen when we
Mm.
dissociate.
Yeah.
And so I think, we want to go into, what we've maybe noticed and people experience the most. And I'm really careful about sharing details and specifics about clients because of obviously I don't have any consent for release, and that would be a different thing. But sharing just in general some experiences that we've noticed are common, and you know
Yeah.
just to help people understand what that actually, because it's really only about 40 minutes, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think obviously the questions that we get are directed towards ketamine, right? That's the medicine that we kind of work with. Obviously, it's the legal medicine that in the US that we're allowed to provide patients. And so, understandably, we're working with a patient population that is oftentimes predisposed to wanting control, right?
Yes.
And so, I think naturally, this is a question that anyone would have is like, what does it feel like? But I think even more so for our patients, it's like, I need to know every specific detail so that I can exert my control over the experience so that it doesn't affect me that way, right?
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of ketamine is really to extract the most from it is like relinquishing control, which for a lot of our patients which is like the most difficult thing to do, but that the ketamine really does facilitate that process. And a lot of it comes to the preparation that Maria does beforehand to kind of walk them through the experience
Right.
and how to let go.
Right.
And then the space itself and kind of creating an environment where the individual feels safe to let go.
Yeah.
And then hopefully have the experience that they're supposed to have, right?
Yeah.
So let's maybe go a little bit into kind of what it's like when you step into the clinic and when you leave the clinic, because that's kind of like the acute experience. And then we'll go into what you notice the day 2, 3, 4 after the ketamine infusion and kind of the changes that happen there.
One thing I thought of real quick is, so in my experience, and again, the DSM makes us like use these codes for insurance purposes, but nobody falls into a specific category, but they lean more towards one. And so every client with depression has some anxiety. I've never seen just one. Every anxiety patient has a little depression at times. So it's like, but which is their primary? And the reason I think this is funny is because the severe depression clients that I have, they're like, I'm in, because again, there's a level of desperation there when you're feeling so bad.
Yeah, that's true.
The anxious clients have a really hard time.
Very true.
Very hard time letting go, very anxious about what's going to happen. And so I support them differently in the beginning based on what they're dealing with the most.
Yeah, no, I mean, very true.
And you've seen that too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think big picture, I mean, everyone truly does respond to this differently, but the really severely anxious patients tend to have the hardest time letting go, understandably, right? That's how their brains work. It's basically, I won't get too into the weeds with it, but you have this thing called the default mode network in your brain. And when you're in your resting, kind of ruminating state of mind, that part of your brain is really active.
Yeah.
And kind of generally anxious patients, that part of the brain is always suppressed down, right? They are oftentimes very responsive to external stimuli and they don't want to be in their head, where depressed patients, it's quite the opposite. So ultimately with our anxious patients and with our depressed patients, we subtly change the way we recommend going into the experience, but on the whole, it's really about coming to a space that you trust. So when the patients walk into our door, the first thing we do is the kind of the traditional medical stuff, right? We obviously, by the time they're in our door, they have had a full consult, making sure that they're safe to do the medicine and all that kind of stuff. We do a quick physical exam, we collect vital signs, things like that. We place the IV in the patient, and then we hook it up to a pump. The ketamine is run over 40 minutes. That's the pretty traditional model for most mental health purposes. Occasionally that'll change, but for the most part, 40 minutes is the go-to. Right before the patient start, we get an eye mask on the patient. We get headphones on the patient.
Yeah.
maybe let's pause there, because that is like a really, that is not like a traditional.
Many IV clinics don't even do that.
Yeah,
but that is really critical in terms of being able to go inward, and the letting go process, right? It's
yes.
just getting, because the music can take you to a whole different. Well, you can explain that too.
No, yeah, no. I mean, yeah, I think it's a seemingly little thing, but I think it is truly one of the most important things for this experience.
I agree.
We oftentimes will have patients that will ask us, or especially me in the clinic, like, is it okay if I don't wear the eye mask? And if it is a comfort thing, maybe based on a prior trauma, of course.
Yeah.
My recommendation is to do it for a number of reasons. One is, I think, if anyone who's ever tried to meditate with their eyes open, it's really difficult, right? Because you're just constantly getting fed stimuli. Right. And so what the eye mask kind of forces you to do is be internal, which is where a lot of our patients, and honestly myself included, most people don't want to be.
Exactly.
Right? We don't want to be in here. In here is scary, and we have to process things. And then the headphones, obviously part of it is to get rid of any ambient sound going on.
Yeah.
But music plays such a massive role in this experience, and that's probably a whole other episode for sure. But needless to say,
music is like the therapist in the room with that client, because while it's playing, and you have an amazing curated list, but there's specific lists that take you on the journey, and it is guiding and moving you in that direction as you're processing. And so that's a really critical piece.
Okay, so you're in the chair, and now it's like, well, what does it feel like, right? And this is where everyone's experience diverges. And kind of my last parting words for the patients when they're in the clinic is to really try and just let go. Every experience is going to be different. Just go where this one's going to take you, right? Float down the river, and don't grab onto the side, just like keep floating. Right? And that's really hard to do. And it takes time, right? And that's why sometimes multiple infusions, they get more comfortable with that. Some patients will say they've had a positive experience or a negative experience, but we try and even it out. It's like, it's just meaningful. What you're going to get from it is what you were supposed to get from it. For some people, it's very light. Maybe they feel a little floaty in the chair, maybe a little tingly in the hands, and that's it. That's all they feel. For other patients, it's as extreme as they became a droplet of water in the sky, and they fell and dissolved into the ocean, and then we're swimming with the fishes, and that's the far end of the spectrum to the right. Most people are in between that, right? What do you make of the experience itself? How do you kind of guide patients to navigate that experience?
Well, I think what you just said is important. It's going where it takes you. I mean, I like to have them go in with some intention, because you are really conscious during it. It's like, even though there's a bit of floaty dissociation going on, you're aware that you're in the room, you're aware that, so I do have people kind of having that in the back of their minds, but for the most part, kind of to go wherever it takes you, and then to just, I think, be in that and see what comes of it later, because I don't know, we've just had some really unique experiences with.
So with patients, let's say for, a lot of our patients have PTSD and really significant traumas. How do you approach kind of acknowledging that they very well could re-experience that trauma? How do you kind of teach them to walk through that process, why there's value in it? And what do you say to your...
Well, that is the scariest part. And one other actual big question that I get asked a lot is, there is some sexual abuse going to be revealed that I didn't know about, like pre-verbal, and people are afraid to even try it because of that reason. And that's a whole nother episode, because we, sometimes things can be revealed, but we have to evaluate whether that's real or not too, because we're in a dreamlike state. And so there's a lot that comes from that. But I tell them, like, whatever needs to come up is important to work through, because it's affecting your life if it's still unconscious. So, I mean, I have had a client, and this was, I think, through psilocybin in a different way, but had sexual abuse revealed that they didn't know about. And it put the pieces together of the way that she was throughout her entire life from that point on, the way she felt about her body, the way, and so it was powerful for her, because she was able to kind of understand that I'm trying to think of how to say this. So you as the adult, when you're in that state, can go back and repair all that that child experienced because, again, of that different perspective taking in a way that's so profound. Because she kind of had always just been obsessed with her body, didn't like men to look at her, avoided relationships. I mean, there was all these fearful things that had developed, and now that she understood why, it was like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of that anymore. I know I can take care of myself as an adult. I can keep myself safe. So sometimes during the session, I will, with the abuse people that know what they're dealing with going in, because these are people not knowing, and then we have to process after and go back in and do this work of how do you as the adult take care of that child during that dissociation. How do you remind that child? And I work a lot with parents, and so I help them think about, like, what would you want to tell your child in that situation? How would you want to empower them? What would you want to say to them? How would you keep them safe? Because this is the part of them healing themselves. They actually have the ability to heal themselves in that dissociation by using some of those techniques of just going back and seeing that child and treating that child in a whole different way, loving that child, reminding that child that that was never meant to happen, and it was some horrible thing that happened. And then they're able to come out and be separate from it. And that's the part I think that, we see is when you're separate from it and can interact with it differently, it's a game changer.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. I think, there's research coming out showing that with PTSD, it's for neurobiologically, your brain is the centers that are being activated when you receive the trigger of the trauma are as if it is happening to you now.
Exactly.
Right. And I think consciously we know that. Maybe some patients it's buried deep and they're not aware of that consciously, the whole body keeps the score type thing, right? But really the beauty of processing these things, if it does happen, right? We don't solicit it. It's not like I need to go back to that experience and visualize it again. No. But if it comes up, the real power and beauty of it is it removes it from happening to you now, and it's something that happened to you in the past.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think getting that third person perspective in a way, and a lot of times it really is that detail where patients will say, I was watching it happen to me, right? Like out of their body, right? And I think as much as it's terrible and horrible that these things happen to these people, and also it can be really difficult to re-experience, there's so much value in it. And I think at the end of the day, when patients will ask us, like, understandably, if they're concerned about maybe re-experiencing it, they have to be ready for it, right? Like I think at the end of the day, we can't say it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, but if it's something that you are ready to process and move through, like we're here to support you and be with it. But like, you're the one going through it. So ultimately, like, when you're ready, we'll be there to kind of hold your hand along the way, and make sure that you feel secure and safe. But I think people get to a time in their life when they know now is the time that I move on and not. And so another thing that we oftentimes get patients will ask us is like, how intense the experience is that dictate how effective the medicine is. Right.
We get that.
And there's also a lot of I think understandably we are hardwired in the medical space to feel like the stronger I feel something, it must mean the stronger the medicine. Right. And I think, I'll link an article in the show notes. It's like the role of dissociation and the antidepressant effects of ketamine. It's a review article, long title. Long story short, we really don't know. We don't know if the level of dissociation, the intensity of the experience is related to how effective this medicine is. In my experience, it doesn't seem directly correlated. I have some patients that have very mild experiences during the whole thing, to the point where minutes after the infusion's done, they almost seem completely sober to me. And I have other patients that are singing and arms are going up and all over the place, and then a week later they feel like they're back to how they were, and it's not effective. And so my clinical experience, it feels important to acknowledge the experience itself, but it's not critical to the effectiveness of the medicine. What do you think on that space?
I would agree with you. I think, again, the antidepressant effects in and of itself are so profound. And we talked a little bit about in the last episode what happens after the ketamine session is so important as well. The in terms of the actual antidepressant piece of it, whether they had a good trip or a weird trip or whatever, it doesn't seem to matter on those ends. The part where it matters is people having this window of opportunity to do the deeper processing.
Yes, for sure.
With trauma that they haven't been able to work through. And so I find that part really profound, but at the same time, it doesn't always come up with people. Like sometimes I had a client that really wanted to resolve grief over a partner that had died, and was going in tightly hoping to like the partner would talk to her, there would be something.
Totally.
And it was nothing came up about that, but other things got revealed that we worked on, and and so that's where too going in with specific expectations can be a little bit harmful, because we get a lot of people that are super disappointed or frustrated that they didn't get what they wanted out of it. And so it's
kind of the beauty of this space though too, right? Is like I really can't tell you what you're going to experience going into it, and like acknowledging that from the medical space of like I don't know, I really don't, honestly. And like even one infusion and the third infusion could be completely different experiences. The dose could be the same.
You're right.
And it tends to be that as patients move along, they start to have intense isn't the right word, but more open experiences. They experience more during it, because I think a lot of it is just feeling comfortable and relaxing into the space. But I do think that there is a pretty significant subset of patients I see that are so attached to the experience itself that it almost sets them off afterwards, where the day or two afterwards they're so fixated on that, gosh, I didn't work through that thing I wanted to do, like I have to wait till my next infusion, and I hope they go up on the dose so that I can unlock that that door. And it's like it just doesn't work that way.
I know.
And I think it's our jobs, honestly, as the providers, to educate people about this and really set expectations, mitigate expectations, and show people that the real value of here is not trying to control the experience. And I think that kind of dovetails into your work the days after the ketamine infusion. So maybe could you describe your experience? To be clear, therapy is valuable regardless of whether you're doing ketamine or not, right? There is just a subset of patients that oftentimes can utilize this medicine to catalyze a more intense therapeutic experience. But what is your experience like with certain patients pre-ketamine and post-ketamine, like in the actual room itself talking? How do you notice differences?
Well, again, I like the word catalyst, because for a depressed person, part of the depression is very physical. It's like no energy for anything. They're moving slowly.
You feel it in the room with them.
I can feel it.
Totally.
And I've experienced it. And I think just the fact that there's that energy. I mean, you can do so much. Well, I think like even exercise, like most people want to do some exercise, but for depressed people, the thought of even like taking a short walk could be super exhausting. And so then after that treatment, they have the energy, which also gives them the desire. And they'll be like, and so I'll plan with them, well, what are some things you've enjoyed doing in the past? Like maybe just get out your bike again and start biking. And I talk a lot about, the importance of sunlight and routines and sleep, because all of those things get dysregulated in depression. And the reason I'm also focusing on depression is that actually is what this was legalized for, was treatment-resistant depression was the focus for all those people that were not responding to medications. This medicine was actually approved for, but we're using it for other purposes as well. But anyway, that's just one example. Like the exercise is a big thing. And then just like the ability to maybe cook again. I mean, people that are depressed are like often eating whatever because they're too tired. And so those little things, it's like helping them think about what are some activities you used to enjoy, or like what are the foods you like to make, or how can we think of simple ways to get those good foods in your home. And those two changes, I mean, so much research about diet and exercise will keep the depression away long term. Just those two changes.
Yeah.
And the sleep and, having some healthy routines, but of course, the good people. So the hardest thing I find is working with, especially a female in an abusive relationship,
Yep.
because I do see a lot of that population. And if they're going back to the abusive situation, I can give them tools and boundaries they can set and new ways to handle it. But eventually, that relationship is going to wear them down again, and they're going to be having some of the same feelings. So, this is where we might also talk about, is this a time to think about maybe leaving something that's really toxic, whether it be a person in your life or a job? Because a lot of times jobs come up. And if people aren't in the right fit and they're not feeling purpose and they're not energized in their work, the ketamine gives them that realization of like, I don't have to live this way.
Yeah.
And so all of those types of things following the treatment are what I'm seeing is the exciting stuff that we can shift because they're no longer stuck biologically in that low mood.
Right. It just kind of like greases the wheel. It makes things a little bit easier to do.
Yeah.
But it also, I like to say that ketamine allows you to form habits easier, right? But what those habits aren't necessarily always positive, right? And so I think it really is critical to kind of come into the space with a clear intention of what you're trying to work through, but also like what are you going to do when this 3-4 week experience starts? Like what are some things that you're
day up to, I mean,
totally,
the meditate, like I'm always having people think of, because with the infusion day you want to be really relaxed going in and relaxed after. You don't want to go right back to work. You don't want to, and so we'll plan out what that day is going to look like. But even following, like this is a great time to get a meditation routine going. And I mean, 3 minutes a day, again, research shows profound benefits of meditation. So we'll talk about all of those things that if they continue those things, again, like huge impact.
Right. Yeah. And I think it just kind of facilitates starting these things that you've wanted to start for a long time, right? It doesn't like
you didn't have the energy to start.
You still have to do it, right? You still have to, whether it's working out, whether it's eating healthy, things that everyone knows we should do.
Right.
It just makes it easier. I'm curious when it comes to, because I'm not in the room with you, but like when they're talking about their life or their experience, do you notice a shift in some patients, kind of how open they are about speaking about things, or like they become less filtered, or they're recalling things maybe that they weren't necessarily talking to you about before? Like how does that part change, the actual speaking about their life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll tell you, because I have several clients I'm working with that I've seen for probably close to 10 years, because I do a lot of attachment work. And people that literally have not had anyone securely attached with them have, been alone for most of their lives. It's almost like, and I've been helping them manage survival mode is basically what it is. And the medications may help a little bit, but they're still in survival mode. It's almost like I get to meet the person for the first time. It's really amazing. Because to see them like suddenly have a spark of feeling good is like turning the lights on a little bit. And then starting to tap in and get to know like who they are and their interests. It's almost, I guess some ways I think of it as like, it's almost like that little child that's going out and playing. It's like we get to experience that again, because they really get in touch with their true self and are able to kind of set aside a lot of the things that they've been living under.
Yeah, it's this like glimmer of hope.
The glimmer of hope. I love that.
Man, it's like, and I think that's such a critical piece of it. Like there is a transient effect of ketamine that is, we both acknowledge is transient, but I think there's so much value in these patients who for so many years been stuck in these, dungeons of despair, and like there's no light in the world, and getting just a sense of like, wow, there's another world out there. That's enough oftentimes to just start to trigger these life changes, and it's a real snowball effect with that. But
and speaking of the experience, a lot of people will experience profound connection with nature, because they'll start to see
Yes.
nature,
Yeah.
and really a level of compassion and a feeling of being loved. I don't know if you noticed that coming out. But
Absolutely. I mean, that's, I think, intrinsic to psychedelics as a whole. And I think
yeah.
I mean, again, we talk about this in a lot of detail in the future, but I think humans, I do deeply feel, are hardwired to love and be compassionate and find beauty in nature and the world around us. And our lives are so isolated these days, and we're so removed from nature these days. And I find it so fascinating, but also absolutely understandable that so many of my patients, after they go through this, want to spend more time in nature and want to be around more people, right? Like how, like it's the human experience, and we've somehow crafted these lives that are opposite of what we actually need to feel value and purpose and joy, right?
Right.
And so I think it just brings us back to like where we should be.
Yeah.
You know? Okay, that was a lot to talk about one subject, but I think it's a really important subject, and I really, as you can tell, there's no clear answer here.
Yeah.
Your experience is going to be different every time. I can't tell you what it's going to be. I think it's really critical to come in with the proper preparation, to integrate it afterwards. I'd say the most important thing is just feeling ready for it and feeling like you're in a safe space.
Yep.
Right? Like kind of the attention to detail throughout the whole experience, both for you and providers, is absolutely critical. And at the end of the day, you're going to know when you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that
sound
good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Cool.
All right.